The topic of the discussion today is critical, and it is something that the community has been grappling with for far too long. So I'm excited about today's presenters, and I look forward to hearing new and innovative ideas and strategies that will lead to reducing and ultimately eliminating the tragic disparity that has existed for far too long in birth outcomes for Black women. I do want to be clear up front about my position on the issue, and it's based on my own personal experiences and my years of experience in examining racial inequities in multiple systems. I've just put out up front that I believe that institutional and structural racism is at the very core, and that if we really want to change outcomes, we must be willing to confront and to interrupt racism. We can no longer tiptoe around the conversation. We cannot continue to come together year after year in forums and conferences and have surface level conversations that have really not resulted in the kinds of outcomes that we all want to see. So I want to briefly talk about what I call a groundwater analysis of racial inequities. And so the first thing is that racial inequities look the same across systems. So if we saw the outcomes that we see in only one system, perhaps we could attribute those outcomes to individual pathology. But the fact that they exist across multiple systems suggests systemic rather than individual factors. And so we have to just, we can talk a lot more about the how of that and all of the systems that I'm referring to, but I just want to kind of set the context by making sure that we are consciously aware of the fact that it's not just about health outcomes or birth outcomes, but it's about the outcomes that exist in every system. We also know that systems contribute significantly to disparities, and that many of the interventions that we have been involved with have been primarily aimed at changing the behavior or the psychology or the environment of the patient or the client, and that this has not been effective. And it will not be effective as long as it is in isolation of systems being willing to do what I refer to as turning the mirror inward and having some mutual accountability for the internal policies and practices that has kept institutional and structural racism in place, and thereby contributed to and sustaining old attitudes and assumptions that operate in the form of implicit and explicit biases. And then the idea that poor outcomes are concentrated in certain geographic communities, usually poor communities and communities of color. And most of you in this room could probably point to certain areas in the city of Austin or certain zip codes in the city of Austin and in other communities across Texas where people suffer the poorest outcomes in their relationship with all of the systems that they interact with, be it child welfare, juvenile justice, criminal justice, health, housing, economics, education, transportation, insurance, just to name a few. Each of these systems have a relationship to each other and to the same vulnerable populations. And our surface level explanations have been that it's about individual pathology, and that is what leads to these outcomes being concentrated in poor communities, and that it is individual pathology that leads to the poverty that people in these communities experiences. A groundwater analysis takes a deeper examination of the reasons for poverty. It examines why people are poor and how racism contributed to and keeps poverty in place. So if we're going to resolve issues of racial inequities, we must get to what a dear friend of mine calls the cause of the cause. we can't look at it at the surface level. We have to examine it at a deeper level. And our conversations have to also be grounded in our understanding of racism, what it is, how it came to be, how it manifests, and how it contributes to our internalized racial oppression, both inferiority and superiority. So changing birth outcomes for poor Black women and for wealthy Black women requires the same strategy: undo racism. So let's talk about what we need to know. And just to put this in here is to say that health data shows that socioeconomic status differences does not explain racial disparities. And so we have to understand it from someplace other than believing that poverty is the sole cause of these issues. So let's look at what we need to know about the design of systems to understand what is happening in terms of systemic racism. So the systems and institutions as we know them are decades old. And they've been in existence and were developed long before many of you, let me say, in this room, were ever born. But, you know, one of the things that we know about systems is that they're very resistant to change. When you think about institutionalizing something, there's a lot that goes into putting in place policies and practices that will sustain, that will be difficult to change. And we've even seen it such that even when systems know that some of the policies and procedures that are in place are not yielding the right outcomes, that people will be challenged to even try to bring forth ideas about changing those. And if you do, there's a lot of red tape to go through to try to make that change. And so that's the nature of systems. The other thing is that systems and institutions are very oppressive, not only to the communities that they serve, but also to the people that work inside. And I just happened to come up on a very appropriate article this morning that I won't read, but it for me really clearly indicated the oppressive nature of systems and how difficult it is for well-meaning people to work inside of systems and be able to really bring forth those new and innovative and bold and creative ideas in a way that may not necessarily be aligned with the way the system is used to operating. So in the metro part of the Austin Statesman this morning, there's an article about a health official being out after a study that he conducted. And, you know, it just says that a top state health official is stepping down after co-authoring a study that drew strong backlash from Republican leaders for suggesting that cuts to Planned Parenthood are restricting access to women's health care statewide. Now, I'm pretty sure that this gentleman used data to come up with this analysis and the outcomes, but as a result, he's now out. And that's the oppressive nature of the way in which systems operate, which is something that as a community and as systems people, we have to really understand how to come together and collectively work to overcome and lift the foot of oppression, not only from communities, but also from the people who work inside of systems. The other thing about systems is that the systems and institutions as we know them were designed by whites, for whites, to the exclusion of all other peoples until not so very long ago. And so what we know is that when systems and institutions open their doors to the people who had previously been left out, with well intentions, I would say that the door opened with the idea that if systems and institutions are working well enough to benefit whites, then surely they will benefit all other peoples. But we know from historical data and all of the data today that has not been the case. And so white people have the best outcomes in every one of our helping systems. And this is not to assume that systems cannot do a better job for serving all people, but it is to recognize that the bookends are still in place and that systems are doing exactly what they were designed to do. So if we are to change birth outcomes for Black women, we must first change and transform the system and institutions that they interact with over their life course. And I'm sure someone will speak more about that today. That means that we can no longer allow systems to deny the existence of institutional and structural racism, but rather we must come to understand the profound negative impact that racism has on all of us and seek to develop a common understanding and language so that we can have conversations, not about who is racist, but rather about what it means to operate under anti-racist policies and practices. Otherwise, systems continue to produce what they were designed to produce, and they continue to serve the people that they were designed to serve. And so I think that we are all here today because we believe that Black babies can live. Yes, they can live if we stop focusing on what's wrong with their mothers and their fathers and ask instead what happened to them in their relationship with racist systems and institutions. Thank you.